In the 24th century, Captain Jean-Luc Picard has a nightmare about his traumatic experience on being assimilated by their lethal alien enemy, the Borg. He is awakened by a call from Admiral Hayes, an official of a paramilitary space force known as the Starfleet. Admiral Hayes informs Picard that the Borg have begun an invasion against the United Federation of Planets, commonly known as the Federation. Picard is instructed to patrol the neutral zone with his crew in their ship, the USS Enterprise E. Their ship is assigned to watch over any possible disturbances from another extraterrestrial race called the Romulans. Picard relays the news to his crew afterwards, but they are all against going to the neutral zone because the Romulans no longer show any suspicious activity. Despite their insistence on helping the other ships fight the Borg, Picard decides to head to the neutral zone. William Riker, one of the crew members, later reports to Picard that they have finished their task in the neutral zone. He asks Picard why they are in the neutral zone instead of helping other Starfleet ships in fighting the Borg. Picard deduces that Starfleet does not want him to join the fight since he might be emotionally unstable after being assimilated by the Borg. However, Riker believes otherwise, telling Picard that his experience makes him the perfect man to lead the fight. Later, the entire U.S. Enterprise crew gathers in the ship's control center. They learn that the Starfleet ships sent on battle are losing against the Borg. In effect, Picard decides to disobey orders and take the ship to Earth's orbit, where the battle is taking place. The U.S. Enterprise crew uses their ship's warp drive technology, allowing them to travel to their destination faster than the speed of light. Meanwhile, the battle between the group of Starfleet ships and a Borg cube ensues near the planet Earth. The Borg cube is holding its own, able to destroy and deal great damage to the Starfleet ships. The U.S. Enterprise immediately joins the battle as soon as they arrive. They bring in the surviving crew members of the U.S. Defiant, along with its captain, Klingon Worf. Afterwards, Picard contacts the remaining Starfleet ships and leads the entire group. Through his command, the ships aim and fire at a particular spot of the Borg cube, blowing it to bits. However, a small sphere escapes from the Borg cube just before the explosion. The U.S. Enterprise chases after the sphere as it is headed towards the Earth. At the same time, Worf joins the crew on the bridge and helps them pursue the sphere. Data, a male android crew member, detects chronometric particles surrounding the sphere. Picard thus concludes that the Borg are creating a vortex to travel through time. As they reach near the Earth, the crew discovers that the planet has been inhabited by the Borg. Picard then realizes that the Borg have time travel to change history. They follow the moving sphere into the vortex, which leads them to the past. The sphere and the U.S. Enterprise travel back to the mid-21st century, dated April 4, 2063. This dates one day before Zefram Cochrane, a pioneering human scientist, launches his ship named Phoenix, which is equipped with his warp drive invention. Cochrane's ship is the first in history to successfully develop a ship that can warp drive. He built his warp drive ship from an abandoned nuclear missile that was used during the Third World War. Cochrane's invention has allowed for the human race to have its very first encounter with alien species, and he is regarded by everyone in the future as a hero. In turn, the Borg attempts to change history and prevent the first contact between human beings and aliens. As soon as it arrives at the Earth's orbit in the past, the sphere fires aggressively at Cochrane's location in Montana, USA, where Cochrane is building the warp drive ship Phoenix. Cochrane and his assistant, Lily Sloan, avoid the attacks and go into hiding. The U.S. Enterprise follows right after the sphere, settling at the Earth's orbit as well. Picard commands Worf to fire at the sphere, successfully destroying it. The crew eventually realize the Borg's plans through Picard, who apparently can hear the movements of the Borg. Picard and a few crew members alight the U.S. Enterprise to check on Cochrane and the Phoenix on the Earth's surface. They enter Cochrane's site in Montana, wearing mid-21st century civilian attire. Inside, they find some of Cochrane's crew members already dead. Data and Picard head towards the warp ship and find that it has been damaged in the attack. Just then, Sloan catches Picard and Data studying the ship, causing her to fire a gun at them in defense. Data approaches Sloan to stop her from firing when she suddenly faints from severe radiation poisoning during the previous attack. The ship's chief medical officer, Beverly, checks on Sloan and brings her to the ship's infirmary. At the same time, Picard orders the U.S. Enterprise's repair crew to fix Cochrane's ship. Picard marvels at the sight of the actual warp ship before him. Touching it, he admits that it was his boyhood fantasy to see and touch the historical warp ship up close. Data curiously asks Picard if his perception of the ship has changed after touching it. Picard affirms, saying that touch can connect humans to an object in a personal way. Later, Picard's counselor and advisor, Deanna Troi, notifies them that Cochrane is nowhere to be found. They begin to suspect that Cochrane may have died during the attack, making Picard worry for the future. Unbeknownst to them, a group of the Borg has invaded the lower deck of the U.S. Enterprise. The Borg plans to modify the ship and make it their own, mercilessly assimilating crew members. Picard, on another note, is able to sense the movements of the Borg. He returns to the U.S. Enterprise with Data, instructing Riker to guard Cochrane's warp ship. As they lose contact with the rest of their crew members, Data locks out the U.S. Enterprise's main computer, preventing the Borg from hacking their system. Around the same time, Sloane has regained consciousness after being treated by Beverly and the medical crew. They drag Sloane with them and escape the deck as the Borg aggressively break into the ship's medical laboratory. Sloane, however, escapes on her own and heads on a different route. In the meantime, Picard, Data, Worf, and the rest of the U.S. Enterprise crew members gather their firearms to fight the Borg. They enter the engineering deck in an attempt to disable the Borg invaders. To their dismay, many of the systems have already been tampered and modified by the Borg. Just then, Beverly and the medical crew emerge from one of the pipes. Beverly tells Worf about Sloane's escape, asking him to find her immediately. They encounter a group of the Borg and some of their assimilated crew, shooting the crew with their laser guns. Picard and his crew are then forced to retreat to another deck, but as they escape, Data gets captured by the Borg. While running, Picard comes across Sloane, who corners him using a phaser. He tries to convince Sloane that he is not an enemy. Picard also reveals to Sloane that they are in a ship outside of the Earth, causing her to be frightened and confused. Later on, she decides to trust Picard as she surrenders her gun to him. On the Earth's surface, Troy finally meets Cochrane inside a bar. Troy is drinking while watching over Cochrane when Riker arrives and turns off the music. Drunk Cochrane gets furious at Riker. He ignores Riker later on and toasts a drink with Troy, sharing that the Phoenix has been destroyed. After a while, Troy also gets drunk and rants at Riker about Cochrane's behavior. She suggests telling Cochrane the truth about his future, but Riker opposes, worrying that it might affect the original timeline. The two continue to watch Cochrane while he is drunk dancing, baffled after seeing their hero in his real behavior. Later, Troy and Riker introduce their real identities to Cochrane and tell him about the future, but he laughs it off due to disbelief. Geordi LaForge, the ship's chief engineer, joins them in proving the truth to Cochrane by showing him the U.S. Enterprise ship on the Earth's orbit through a telescope. Cochrane is eventually convinced and decides to help the crew members repair the Phoenix and launch it as planned. Back inside the U.S. Enterprise, the Borg are still unable to fully control the ship. This is because Data had secured the main computer using an encryption code. In effect, Data is taken to a different deck, where he is surrounded by the Borg. Data tells them that he cannot be assimilated and that the code within his neural nets cannot be forcibly removed or overwritten. However, the Borg were able to reactivate his emotion chip, seemingly erasing Data's emotions. A woman who was later identified as the Borg Queen shows herself to Data, entering the deck with her head before slowly attaching herself to her robotic body. Data eyes the Borg Queen and begins to ask her countless questions, including the hierarchy of relationships in the Borg. The Borg Queen claims that she brings order to the chaos, as it is the Borg's goal to make the imperfect perfect. Gradually, the Borg appeals to Data's developing emotions through the Queen. The Borg Queen willingly helps Data to achieve his personal goal of becoming more human. They process a skin grafting procedure for Data, intending to obtain the encryption codes from him in return. Later, Data continues to ask her curious questions, but the Borg Queen cuts him off. She wonders why Data wants to become human when they are flawed and imperfect in many ways. Data replies that believing in the idea of perfection makes her a delusional mind. He breaks free and attacks the Borg around, but stops after he gets wounded on his arm. Data is unable to process the new sensation, seeing the newly attached flesh on his arm bleed while feeling pain from it. The Borg Queen takes advantage of his confusion and seduces Data, kissing him on the lips. In turn, Data experiences physical pleasure, to which he gives in. Meanwhile, Picard and Sloane quietly roam around the ship for any signs of the Borg. Sloane stares at the ship in awe at its appearance and technology, thinking that the entire ship could have been very expensive. In reply, Picard reveals that money no longer exists in the 24th century. Just then, they find themselves in a Borg-infested area. The two retreat to an empty deck, creating a diversion by activating holographic figures to confuse the Borg. Picard kills two of the Borg and obtains their neural processor, which contains a record of the instructions they have been receiving. They reunite with their other crewmates later on, as Picard learns from the neural processor that the Borg are calling for reinforcements. On Earth, Cochrane starts working with Geordi and the repair crew the next morning and gets agitated by the attention he is receiving from them. Geordi then explains that they have developed a little hero worship towards him, since in the future they all grow up regarding him as their hero for inventing the warp drive. He also reveals to Cochrane that this entire area will be turned into a historical site in which there is a large statue of him. In reply, Cochrane tells Geordi that he needs to use the bathroom, only for Geordi to find out that Cochrane is trying to run away. Geordi and Riker immediately follow Cochrane to the forest. When Cochrane gets caught, he tells them he wants to back out from repairing the ship, insisting that he does not want to be an honorable statue. They fail to convince Cochrane as he is insistent on running away, so Riker shoots him with a laser beam to calm him down. An hour before the scheduled launching of the Phoenix, Riker visits Cochrane. Their group has successfully finished their repairs and are now preparing for the ship's historic launch. Riker joins Cochrane inside as he wraps up their preparation, and he tells Riker that he is far from the historical figure of him that they depicted. Cochrane confesses that did not build the Phoenix to lead a new era for humanity. Instead, he built the Phoenix to earn money out of it and be able to retire on a tropical island. Meanwhile, Picard, Worf, and the ship's navigator named Lieutenant Sean Hawk get in their spacesuits and head outside the ship. They encounter a group of Borg outside, and they assimilate Hawk in the process. Despite that, Picard and Worf successfully destroy the deflector dish, able to prevent the Borg from making further contact with their reinforcements. When they return inside, they learn that the Borg has assimilated more crew members. Worf suggests destroying their ship because they are already outnumbered and compromised. Picard, however, furiously declines Worf's suggestion, insisting to stay and fight the Borg. Worf objects to Picard's decision, telling him that he is allowing his personal experience with the Borg to influence his judgment. In defense, Picard calls Worf a coward for wanting to destroy the ship and run away. As Beverly decides to follow Picard's orders, Sloane is angered and rushes to confront him. Sloane agrees with Worf that staying in the ship and fighting will only lead to their immediate defeat. Picard reveals to Sloane that he was previously assimilated by the Borg, so he knows how to fight them. Sloane then realizes that he has been seeking revenge all this time. Picard retaliates, hitting a glass window with his gun out of anger and denial. Sloane convinces Picard that he is being irrational with his decision and that he is jeopardizing the safety of his crew to satisfy his desire for revenge. After a while, Picard changes his mind, ordering everyone to prepare to evacuate their ship. He commands the initiation of the ship's auto-destruct sequence and later on apologizes to Worf for his irrational behavior. As the crew members proceed to their escape pods, Picard takes one last look around the bridge before it gets destroyed. Just then, Data's voice echoes in his ears, prompting him to remain in the ship and save Data from the Borg. Picard bids farewell to Sloane before she boards the escape pod. He decided to return to the engineering deck, confronting the Borg Queen. There, he finds Data already grafted with human flesh and skin. Picard remembers her vision and how she wanted a human being who would bridge humanity and the Borg. He reminds the Borg Queen of their time during his assimilation, where she wanted him to stay by her side as an equal. Picard appeals to her and offers himself willingly to the Borg in exchange for freeing Data. The Borg Queen addresses Picard by his Borg identity, Locutus, and agrees to the deal. However, when the Borg Queen releases Data, he refuses to leave them. Data follows the Borg Queen's command to deactivate the ship's auto-destruct sequence. Moreover, Data enters the encryption codes voluntarily, giving the Borg complete control of the U.S. Enterprise. He stands beside the Borg Queen and tells her that Picard is better off as a Borg drone. As a result, they capture Picard and tie him down. In the meantime, Cochrane, Riker, and Geordi are activating the warp drive technology on the Phoenix. Troi assists them from the ground and informs them that the Phoenix is ready to launch. Cochrane plays music to boost his mood while the ship ignites. When the Phoenix successfully reaches the Earth's orbit, Cochrane marvels at the view after seeing the Earth from space for the first time. They prepare to test the warp drive technology of the ship while awaiting the arrival of the Vulcans, the alien species who are bound to discover Cochrane's ship and meet him. However, as the Phoenix attempts its very first warp drive, the Borg interrupts them. The Borg Queen orders Data to fire at the Phoenix using a tactical weapon called the quantum torpedo. To her surprise, the torpedoes miss and never hit the Phoenix. The Phoenix succeeds in its warp flight after having traveled in space faster than the speed of light. Inside the Enterprise, Data has betrayed the Borg Queen. He hits the nearby coolant tank, which emits a strong vapor that diminishes the Borg's biological parts. The exposure to the vapor destroys the Borg drones all at the same time. Picard climbs up to the ceiling and avoids the coolant, but the Borg Queen pulls him down. Just then, Data arrives and separates the Borg Queen from Picard. The Borg Queen falls towards the coolant, making her body dissolve in an instant. As soon as the Borg are defeated, Picard gets rid of the coolant. He crushes the Borg Queen's remains to finish her off completely and goes to Data, who is lying weakly on the ground. Data says that a part of him feels sorry for the Borg Queen's death because she has brought him closer to humanity, which he always wanted. He also admits that for a split second, he was tempted to accept her offer. Amidst his contemplation, he ultimately rejected the offer and followed her orders for the meantime to gain her trust, which resulted in the crew's victory. The Vulcan survey ship has detected the warp flight of Cochrane, and they head to the Earth the day after. Cochrane and the humans in Montana gather outside at the arrival of the Vulcans. He stares in awe, seeing species from another planet before he approaches their ship. As a Vulcan emerges from the ship, Cochrane approaches him, reaching out his hand. The two shake hands, prompting the first contact between the humans and aliens to happen exactly the way it happened in their history. Sometime later, Picard updates his captain's log containing records and important information in his journeys. He reports that the voyage of the warp ship Phoenix on April 5, 2063 was again a success. The remaining U.S. Enterprise crew watch the historic moment between the humans and aliens before they discreetly slip away from the crowd. Picard approaches Sloan to bid his last farewell before they leave. Sloan tells him how envious she is that they are returning to a future world that is happy and prosperous. Picard replies that he envies her as well for being among the important figures who made their future world as happy as possible. Having guaranteed the correction of their history, the U.S. Enterprise crew make their final preparations before departure. In the end, the U.S. Enterprise returns to the 24th century as they recreate the same vortex the Borg used. For a 90s film, the overall execution of the futuristic genre is very well done. The plot is also written with careful thought, bringing an optimistic vibe for the human race and the potentials of the future. It is also accessible to first-time viewers since there are only a few references from previous TV series and films of the same Star Trek franchise. On another note, it may take a while for a viewer with a lack of interest in sci-fi adventure to become fully invested in the film, especially if one prefers more action over dialogue. Overall, the film is a great watch with a large target audience, including the non-fans.